In this world, occurrences are triggered by the flick of a random button. Now it's up to one man to know what these buttons mean and how to use them wisely. On a dirt path in Mexico, a truck steers up the dust as it drives through a long stretch of barren land. Behind the wheel is Karen, a smoking nun wearing her sunglasses. She throws the cigar and turns the radio on, enjoying the music as she continues her route. Elsewhere, in a household, the little boy Antonio breaks something and gets scolded by his mother. His older sister Lorena tries to leave, but their mother stops her. However, her grandfather comes to her defense and lets her go. The mother rebuffs him because his spoiling the kids makes them harder to discipline. Outside, the grandfather calls Antonio and whispers that he'll meet him later by the church's exit to wait for Karen. After a kiss on the cheek, Antonio hurries to school with Lorena. The mother works around the house while the father sits reading the newspaper and wearing a peculiar mask. She looks at him silently and continues to wash the dishes. After a while, over breakfast, she tells the grandfather that her husband is acting differently that day, probably because his opponent is 12 years younger. To allay her fears, the grandfather reminds her that experience is more important. Meanwhile, a car honks in the distance, signaling Karen's arrival. They all shuffle, and the father gets up and bids his wife farewell. Knowing Karen, the mother asks her husband to tell their daughter to drive safely. The husband heads out carrying a bag and meets Karen, who curses at the truck for powering off. Marching back inside once the engine starts, she drives off violently. During the drive, the father asks how her new job is, but she's dismissive about it. After some silence, he brings up her mother, but Karen cuts him off before mocking passersby. They then drive into the distance. In a different space, a feather falls gently over a man sleeping on the floor in his pajamas. He wakes to the sound of a heavy door falling. As he scans his surroundings, he finds nothing but completely white walls with a ceiling way up high. Pacing around in bewilderment, he confirms the walls are solid until he stumbles on a button. Curious, he approaches and confirms it's also solid. When he presses it, cherubs emerge from the walls around him, their baby laughter echoing. After some time orienting themselves on the wall, they all sink back. The man screams in horror. Then he smells his finger, making him scream some more. He yells out to ask about the place but hears no response. No matter what he says, no one replies. He turns to the little members and presses on a random one. The button moves and a toothbrush falls down. The man picks it up, unsure why a toothbrush appeared out of nowhere. Frustrated, he looks around and presses another button, and this time, a megaphone falls. Picking it up, he asks in frustrated confusion about what's happening. Still, he gets no response. With another button, a bonsai tree is thrown inside the room. This confuses him more as he approaches the bonsai. He picks another random button, and the appearance of a clay vase startles him. Though scared, he peers inside the vase but finds nothing useful. Finding nothing better to do, he picks another member, causing sticks to fly into the room. Repeating the action, more sticks appear. He keeps pressing the button to get more sticks, and soon, the sticks pile up, leaving him amazed. Halfway through, he suddenly switches buttons, and a cart slams into his shin from the wall, making him yelp in pain. Using the megaphone, he yells expletives before hitting another button. This time, it turns around, revealing a cherub's behind, and it releases gas in his face. Turning about face, he gets the megaphone and complains about the smell. Back in Mexico, the school bell rings, and the students run to their classrooms. Some bullies take Antonio's stuff and make fun of him for betting on a weak wrestler, Escargot Man. The kids bicker about it, arguing about the wrestlers until their teacher enters. Meanwhile, just outside the wrestling arena, people begin funneling inside. The white space now packs a lot of things thrown inside. The man reclines on his chair and throws a ball blindly against the wall. Then, this triggers a button, and in comes a sushi table. Approaching it, he crouches to inspect the small plate for the soy sauce. Casually, he presses a button, and another sushi flies inside the room. So he can start eating, he asks for some soy sauce. But no matter which button he presses, only sushi emerges. He gives up and begins eating the sushi, finding the flavor so agreeable that he finishes them all. When he's done, he groans in satisfaction. Scanning the remaining buttons, he picks one randomly, only to get a bottle of soy sauce. He throws it away because it's too late anyway and goes to pick another button. The space gives him 3D glasses in response, and upon wearing them, he sees his surroundings tinged in red and blue. He then spots a cherub pointing at its private part through the wall. Thinking it's his exit, he screams in delight and presses it. Instead, the room darkens, and a countdown begins. Panicking, he presses it repeatedly, but the rest of the buttons disappear into the wall. As the countdown nears 0, he scrambles to the middle of the room and finds a huge cherub's backside hovering. Despite his pleas, the countdown reaches 0, and he's hit with a blast of smelly gas. In the wrestling arena, the father walks to the locker room and looks at his family picture. He stands there for a while before changing his clothes to become the wrestler, Escargot Man. In their house, his wife sits on her rocking chair as she sews and looks anxiously at the clock. To To keep himself entertained, the man in the white room starts reading manga. After finishing the 5th volume, he asks for the 6th but gets all other volumes except for it. Crawling around, he accidentally pushes a button that reveals a door at the far end of the room. It doesn't catch his attention at first until the realization dawns on him. Knowing it's his exit, he looks for the button that triggered it, but he doesn't remember which. He picks random buttons. Then he sees a random tribesman and gets hit in the head by a stream of water. Finally, he finds the right button and screams in victory, but he discovers that the button resets and the door disappears. He tries a few more times again, but each time he doesn't reach the door in time. Using his wit, he decides to be resourceful and uses a fly swatter, jump rope, and a fan, but all are futile. Huffing frustratedly, he lies on the cart, presses the button, and pushes himself away, but he just wanders aimlessly. His next attempt only brings out the tribesman. Giving up on the cart, he instead observes what happens when he presses the door button. Learning how it resets, he decides to use the vase to pin it down. However, even with the vase's weight, the button still resets. Thinking the vase isn't heavy enough, he decides to fill it with a water stream and pushes the button for that. However, when he executes his plan, he realizes he can't bring the stream to land inside the vase's mouth. The other methods he tries to bring the water are inefficient too, causing him to abandon the idea. In the arena, the father prays to a religious statue. His daughter, Karen, also kneels in solemn prayer inside the church. The church bell tolls, with Antonio and his grandfather sitting outside, waiting for Karen. Soon, Karen arrives to pick them up before driving off hurriedly. The father finishes donning his costume when he's told the event is about to start. Karen, still driving, honks to speed people up while shouting expletives and getting irritated at other drivers. In the white room, the man discovers he can make the vase heavy by filling it to the brim with sushi. Realizing it's too heavy, he tries pulling some sushi out, but his hand won't fit inside the vase. Getting frustrated, he grabs a pair of sticks and fishes the sushi one by one. It works, but slowly, and in that time, the bonsai flowers have bloomed. Finally, the vase is light enough to carry, although barely. He sets it beside the group of buttons on the floor, but he forgets which button is which. He wrongly picks the tribesman, and he appears to slam into the vase, breaking it in two and leaving only the outline of its sushi content. Frustrated, the man yells out. Finally finding the correct button, he screams while patting it down with disassembled sushi, but the button still resets. Then, he uses duct tape, but the button rips through it. This time, he holds the button down with a metal plate reinforced by tape, but it too pops back up. He is almost by the door when the wall slams down, and he gets hit, causing him to scream in pain. Meanwhile, Karen's group arrives outside the arena in time. Antonio and his grandfather rush inside, but Karen chooses to stay outside. Despite everyone's noisy shuffling, they find comfortable seats in front of the ring. Back in the white room, the man awakens from under the covers and can't help but yelp. Beside him are pain-relieving tablets. Intending to brush his teeth, he looks for toothpaste from the buttons, but instead, he accidentally triggers a long rope dangling from high above. Seconds later, it disappears, and that's when he realizes he can use it to hurl himself at the door. Laughing at the ingenuity, he activates the rope and the button that reveals the door. Swinging himself, he makes it across in time. Reveling in anticipation of his liberty, he realizes too late that the door is locked, and he needs a key. With the wall about to close, he rushes inside the white room, but the wall hits him again. Pained and deeply frustrated, he kicks the wall and also accidentally triggers the button for the key. It floats in the air for some time before disappearing. Amazed, he looks for the button he just hit, but he gets startled when a barking dog figurehead emerges from the wall. Again, he searches, but he finds the same barking dog. Startled and crying, he backs away to the corner before deciding to try again. This time, he finally chooses the right one. To make sure he doesn't accidentally trigger the barking dog again, he looks around to find anything he can use to mark the correct button and notices the pile of sushi. So with his eyes and finger aimed at the button, he steps back to the sushi pile and gets a raw tuna. However, he forgets which button it actually is, and instead triggers the barking dog again. Scared, he now kneels and hits a button, anticipating the dog. But fortunately, it's actually the key. He crowns the button with raw tuna and thinks of a plan. Trigger the rope, swing to get the floating key, open the door, and unlock it to exit. On his first attempt, the man fails. To make sure he'll get close enough to the wall to activate the key, he gets a toilet plunger. But again, his next attempt fails as he accidentally plunges the key to the opposite wall, and it disappears before he can grab it. The third time's the charm. And finally, he unlocks the doorknob. However, it still refuses to open. He looks up and sees a combination padlock he also needs to unlock. Realizing the wall is about to close, he quickly returns to the white room but gets hit again. In pain, he yells and throws the plunger, and it randomly activates a button. The tribesman comes again, and they stare at each other before he casually walks back to the wall. The man is dumbfounded, but then he realizes there's a numerical combination on the tribesman's forehead, 794. Wasting no time, the man gets to work. One by one, he changes the numbers on the combination padlock, making sure to not get hit by the wall this time around. When he finally removes the padlock, he feels victorious, but then he realizes the knob is still locked. Prying it, the door suddenly unlocks and opens. Behind him, the wall shuts tight. However, he realizes the space is too small to fully open the door. Thus, he's trapped in between. He bangs on the wall and yells for help, but he gets no response. Feeling helpless, he cries while remembering all the fun he's had in the White Room. Out of nowhere, he feels an air current. Spotting a gap in the wall, he pushes it aside. Fortunately, it moves, revealing a long hallway. Before anything else can block him, he runs. In the arena, everyone is gearing up for the special main event. Out comes a wrestling duo known as the Rude Ones, drawing out both cheers and boos, but they revel in the attention. Antonio asks if his father will be alright. His father, now Escargot Man, walks to meet his partner, Aguila, passing by an injured wrestler on their way to the ring. Then, the announcer introduces them. With his green and red outfit, he runs around the ring, but their opponents are dismissive. Before the match begins, they're given bouquets, but while Aguila and Escargot are distracted, their opponents hit them from behind with the bouquets. Escargot tumbles out of the ring while Aguila takes a beating. Meanwhile, the man finally emerges into a dark chamber, coughing and panting from running endlessly. Around him are bodies of grown angels stuck to the walls. They disappear, and the doors behind him close. Finding himself back to where he started, he screams in frustration. In the arena, the match begins. Aguila manages to overwhelm and corner the opponent in purple, El Super Demonio, through swift and agile movements and sends him out of the ring. But then, the opponent in black, Tequila Joe, comes, engaging him in slaps. Unfortunately, he gains the upper hand over Aguila, stunning him. He then slams Aguila against the floor. Now disoriented, Aguila is dragged to the ringside, where El Super Demonio kicks his face. Cheers erupt, but others complain of dirty tricks. The opponents gang up on Aguila, and Tequila Joe gives him a backbreaker. They weigh down on him, and the referee counts down amid boos and cheers. El Super Demonio taunts Escargot while his partner gives Aguila another backbreaker. Then, El Super Demonio slams hard on Aguila. Afterward, El Super Demonio picks Aguila and binds his arms behind his back as Tequila Joe prepares to punch him. But Aguila dodges, and El Super Demonio takes the hit. With Aguila leaving the ring, it's now Escargot's time to shine. His opponents leer around him. Then they prepare their attack. As El Super Demonio hits Escargot from behind, the man in the dark room points to a wall filled with buttons. Tequila Joe pushes some spectators to get a metal chair. Despite the referee's warnings, he keeps holding the metal chair. Escargot has already taken a beating from El Super Demonio, and now he is bound helpless as Tequila Joe prepares to hit him in the head. Inside the gray room, the man activates a button. Suddenly, in the arena, Escargot's neck elongates, headbutting Tequila Joe and causing him to fall to his knees. Everyone grows silent in perplexity and anticipation. With another smash on the same button, Escargot swings his head to hit El Super Demonio behind him. Then, the crowd erupts in cheers. The man too is perplexed that nothing is appearing, unlike during his stay in the White Room. Still, he repeatedly presses the button. In the arena, Escargot unwittingly headbutts Aguila, the referee, the announcer, and even Antonio. The confused grandfather watches as Escargot flops his head to repeatedly ring the bell. Finally, the man stops and moves on. He triggers random buttons, causing real-world consequences. In a metal concert in Los Angeles, the lead vocalist breathes fire. The man's meddling interrupts a magic show in Russia where the assistant doesn't disappear as intended. And in China, a man sitting among dogs suddenly barks, upsetting the animals. Giving up, the man steps into the light source, and he notices flying figures above. Surprised to see an angel, he steps back and accidentally hits a button, triggering the blooming of a flower. The man decides to climb the wall using the buttons, and each time he steps on or presses one, something is triggered. Life, accidents, destruction, luck, synchronicities, and more. The man just continues climbing until his hair grows long. At some point, he becomes weightless and begins floating to the light. Still, he's able to activate the buttons and trigger occurrences around the world. As he nears the light, more feathers fall around him. His journey ends when he reaches another space. Behind him, a map of the world emerges from the walls, and with it are everyone's voices. In front of him is a huge member button. For the fate of the world, he stares at it. Then, he approaches.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.